It's a pleasure to be here, Steve. Good morning on a bright Monday morning. I'm coming from the University of California, San Diego campus in lovely La Jolla. Our topic is market sizing and competitive landscape. Our outline for this is the second slide. So we're going to look at the questions number 4 and 5 in the UCCAI web application that ask about market sizing and competitive landscaping. So we're going to ask what are these questions about and why are they asking these questions? And then right away we'll dive into how to supply this information about market size and price and growth rates. And then finally we'll consider the topic of competition, both the current competition and the future. What I'm going to do is to use the example of a recent UC San Diego startup called Topera that went through these questions and almost all the way to the completion. So it offers us a nice baseline to talk about these issues. So question number 4 is a market sizing question, and it's fully spelled out in the slide. But quite simply, it's asking you to define the total and addressable market and a target price for your technology. And it says support your market size with evidence and define a specific patient segment and also what are the market trends and projections. And question number 5 is about the competitive landscape. Define the competition mix for your technology. Think particularly about how the disease will be treated using the technology and the product that you're envisioning, and also how the competitive landscape is projected to shift. So those are the 2 main questions that we are focusing on using this webinar. And the webinar is really intended to get you started to think about these questions. Clearly, these are vast topics. We're not going to have an exhaustive discussion on this topic. And if you're interested in learning more about these topics, I suggest you contact either your tech transfer office or advisors on your campus, your UCCAI personnel, or if there is a business school, they have resources as well. Either a business school librarian or faculty and grad students there could help you collect more information about these topics. But this is really to get us started so we are reasonably fluent to have a conversation and to move to the next step of the application. So let's talk about why we start with markets and competition. Quite simply, if you think about commercialization, which is what UCCAI is all about, success really depends on often the market needs aligning with technological seeds, which is IP protected science and technology that is coming from the lab, and when it meets some unmet market needs, we have significant opportunity being created, value being created. So we have the needs are being met, and investors who invested realize gains, and everybody wins. So this is seen in the example of this company called Topera. Let me introduce that example right away. Topera is, as I mentioned before, a UC San Diego company. And what Topera was all about, they were really trying to treat a certain type of atrial fibrillation, in which we all know is the most common heart rhythm disorder, and it can increase individuals' risks to strokes or blood clot formation. So poor efficacy of current AFib treatment, the PVI, led to recurring AF episodes, atrial fibrillation episodes, which is what led Topera's founders to target this particular condition. So the seed, the technological seed coming from the lab is one of the founders' heartbeat mapping technology that he had developed at UC San Diego. It's called focal impulse and rotor modulation, or acronym FIRM offering, a powerful 3D imaging of electric sources within the heart that helps pinpoint the causes. And as a result of this technology, we're beginning to see increased treatment success rates, reduced need for repeat procedures, and almost permanent relief from AFib for patients. And this is one of the reasons Topera was much sought out, and eventually the company Abbott bought them for $250 million. So at UC San Diego, we have had the fortunate opportunity to work with Topera for the last 2-3 years. In fact, we wrote a mini case study. If you're interested, you can email me. But I'm going to use Topera as an example along the way to talk about our topic for the day. So let's talk about market sizing and pricing, which is question number 4. So why do we, why are we interested in this information? Quite simply, as you may guess, the market size and the target price pretty much determines the total revenue opportunity for the technology or the venture that is created from the technology. Quite simply, the total revenue opportunity is a multiplier of the market size and the target price. That's easy enough, but how do we get there? How do we size the market, and how do we determine the target price? So that's going to be our topic for the next few slides. But recognize that your chances of securing funding and hiring talented personnel, which are critical to the success of the venture, often depends on the total revenue opportunity, right? Both investors and prospective employees want to be lining themselves up with companies that target big revenue opportunities. So market size, how do we get that? So it naturally builds on our responses to the earlier questions in the CAI application about unmet need and proposed product solution. These are questions 2 and 3. Clearly, our technology is targeting an unmet need, and we have a proposed way to treat it, and that's what determines the market size. Quite simply, the clinical need we are targeting defines our total available market, or often abbreviated as TAM, T-A-M. However, we have a proposed solution approach whereby we may not be able to target the entire available market. Maybe we have a certain software-based approach, or a certain payment procedure, or a certain specific patient subset like advanced stage cardiac patients. So this narrows the total available market to the next segment called the served available market, or SAM, S-A-M. And within the SAM, we may target an even narrower segment that has the ability to pay, or the willingness to pay. And this is what defines what's called a target market, or TM. So we can see that more graphically in the next slide, which is actually borrowed from Wikipedia, one of those cases where Wikipedia has a compelling graphic, so I'll use it. So TAM is the outer circle, or how big is our market universe, and within which the SAM, or how many can I reach with my sales channel, with my proposed solution, with the best fit for my technology. That is SAM, or served addressable market, or sometimes called addressable market. And within that, there might be an even narrower segment that we target in the beginning. That's our target market for the first 2-3 years, because we are not a big company. Our go-to-market approach is not by licensing it, but by going straight using a venture, in which case we cannot take on a huge market, so we're going to take on a target market. And within the target market, we are aspiring to win a share of the market, let's say 50% or more, if you really have a lock on the market, or less, if it's a highly competitive market. That defines something called SOM, or the share of the market. So let's look at Topera as an example. Okay, so how do they do this? So you do market sizing using what's called secondary market data. These are data that are put out by specialized market research companies. Sometimes it can be expensive, but oftentimes these companies, like the Grandview Research on the slide, they publish some summary of the market research on the internet. So for Topera, if you do a quick Google search, it shows that the global market for AFib procedures is expected to reach 16.17 billion by 2020. So that's from a source called grandviewresearch.com. So that defines the total available market. But within that, Topera is initially targeting only the US market, and Topera estimates that only 6 million people in the US, about 6 million people suffered from AF. So that's the served available market, because as a small company, initially it's not going to go to all the international markets. And within this, Topera might be initially targeting a specialized market, TM, and that could be the set of customers, who are paid by CMS or a particular type of insurance. So that might determine the target market. And finally, there are established competitors in this market like J&J and Medtronic and so on. And that determines our share of market, maybe 50%. So that's how this market sizing slices down from the TAM to the share of market. Clearly, market sizing is not a precise science, but we can get more rigorous about it using various triangulation procedures. What I just talked about is a top-down technique where you start from the total market and go to addressed market to share of market. And you can combine this with other build-up techniques from the bottom up. You know, you might, in some cases, you might be able to exhaustively list all the potential customers, and what's your share of market with those customers. So that's what's called the build-up technique. And integrate that with some benchmarking approaches like a competitor and in this stage of growth, where were they? So we can triangulate using all of these three to give a more comfortable market size, or more, something that we are more comfortable with. So for example, here is a company that I've had the chance to work with. They are in the diagnostics business. They make diagnostic reagents used by scientists. So they list all the potential customers they have in a geographic area they're going to launch. And then they list how many scientists there are in each of these companies and what is our estimated share in each of these companies, with the scientists. Initially we're not going to get all the 100% of them to convert. Maybe in some companies they're going to convert better. And now it gives you a forecast of the market size, how many scientists will actually end up using this particular product. So this is a build-up methodology. So this study company that I was involved with, so it said forecasting based on competitor sales, we estimate 50,000 units. If we do top-down analysis, we're getting 72,000. If we do bottom-up or a build-up method, we get 45,000. And so they triangulate a weighted means out of 56,000 units. And the triangulated forecast may not be a simple mean. It could be a more appropriately weighted mean based on whichever is more important in this area. Okay, let's now talk about target pricing. So this is the second part of question number 4. First part is market sizing. Second part is target pricing. Target pricing in the health and life sciences is largely driven by reimbursement codes, especially in the developed markets where we have third-party payees. So there are reimbursement procedures. So really we need to be better aware of what the reimbursement coding and pricing data for CMS in particular, Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. So they have a whole coding system which contains codes such as J, A, B, C, etc. We need to get more comfortable. And also the common procedural terminology codes from AMA and other bodies like that. Again, there are specialized sources on the internet or in your own campus. And our own center may launch additional webinars in the future about reimbursement codes that we welcome you to refer to in more detail. And sometimes your procedure may be so novel that there is no established reimbursement code, but you'll have to start with some comparable codes in other areas. So it's really somewhat of a triangulation again here. And if there are competitors, the competitor pricing for this procedure also gives us a guideline. So for example, Top Era was coming up with this new technique, but it had an existing competitor, the PVA approach. And the pricing for that approach gives them some kind of guidance on how to set the pricing. Okay. And the final part of this question is market growth. So we're not only interested in just the market as it is, and also a market that is growing in a very healthy way, because sometimes markets may be small right now, but if they are growing at double-digit rates, that's a very good thing. So usually you represent market growth using what's called the compounded annual growth rate, or CAGR. And CAGR is basically something you can calculate using Excel very easily. You start with what the market is today to where the market will be in 5 years. And what's the compound interest rate that corresponds to this growth from today to 5 years. So that's what we mean by CAGR. So for example, in the Top Era case, Grandview Research said, the global market for AFib is expected to grow at a CAGR of 13.2%. That's a very healthy growth, double-digit CAGR means that the market is going to double within a few years as a whole. So that's a very healthy market. So CAGR is a very crisp summary of the market growth rate. Let's now take a quick look at the competitive landscape. Again, being aware of not just the current competitors, but also potential competitors, future competitors, is essential to our venture success. We need not be paralyzed by competitors, even when they are big ones, giants. Like, look at Topera. Their competitors were the likes of J&J and Medtronic. Of course, that focuses our attention, and the goal is to convert these giants into Goliaths with our ingenuity and focus. So competitors validate our market. So to begin with, so having a competitor is not always a bad thing. They force us to differentiate, focus, execute. So let's begin by listing the following major classes of competitor: existing broad-based competitors like a J&J, existing specialized competitors who play in this particular area alone, and then potential competitors who are likely to enter, and other indirect substitutes that may be emerging. So by having these categories, we are forcing ourselves to think about not just who's out there today, but also who might enter in the future. Because as a new technology innovator, we often tend to become very optimistic, and we are only looking at the current competition. And this is really a way, this question forces you to think about what the competitive landscape is going to be a few years from now. So in the next slide, I give you some ways to visualize the competition. So for example, a simple table where the rows are the different companies and the columns are various features and how your company is positioned with respect to competition. So that's one way to compare yourself and do competitive landscaping. Or you can pick a couple of dimensions that are crucial and do what's called a perceptual map. So on the right of the slide, we see quality versus economical factors like budget and how various companies are positioned there. Or you can do Venn diagrams of the various competitors. So perceptual map is really the easiest to understand, and Venn diagrams get more complicated, and a table is sort of a happy compromise in showing these competitive landscape information. Okay, so let's summarize this webinar. So market sizing, competitive landscaping are questions that make us focus the attention on the end outcomes of the venture, right? And they can greatly improve the credibility of a proposal and your chances of securing funding, both at the centers as well as future funding, right? And clearly, investors are looking for a large and a growing market, but sometimes a market may be small right now, it's growing, that's fine, with healthy pricing trends. So that's like a dream combination, if we can have a large growing market with healthy pricing trends. So we talked about how to do market sizing. We start thinking about the total available market to what percentage of this market can we address, what's called the served available market. And within that, what are we going to target as the best fit for our technology? And in the short term, what's the share of market we are aspiring for? So that gives us pretty much market sizing, and you combine that with the target pricing information driven by reimbursement codes and some growth rate. That pretty much gives you the response for question number 4. And for question number 5, it's really about competition, and it's listing out both current and future competitors and comparing them on various features of the product. And even using a couple of key features to show how the competitors are positioned. Who's really high end, who's low end, where are you located relative to other competitors. So that's what competitive landscaping is all about. So clearly we've given you some stuff to think about on these questions 4 and 5. I hope you really find this useful. Again, if you have any questions about this, you can contact me here. My email is pretty simple, vk@ucsd.edu. And there are also a number of resources both on the internet, and the librarians at your business school or on your campus can give you access to research reports if they have subscriptions. And sometimes, like we do at UC San Diego campus, we have innovators working with the business school students to develop some of this information, to acquire some of this information. So I hope you find this useful, and I want to wish you the best in commercializing your venture and your technology. Thank you. Steve?
Yep, thanks very much, Vish, for this excellent review of the details behind questions 4 and 5 on competitive landscape and market size. So those of you who are listening, if you have questions regarding this material, please contact your center advisors and mentors. And as Vish suggested, you can also reach out to him directly. Thanks very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thanks, Steve.